Lieutenant Mark Wright's blood-stained uniform clung to his skin as he crouched behind a crumbling wall, the last line of defense between the surviving human colonists and the relentless Nasat invasion force. He knew the young Nasat female beside him had given up everything to be there, and now her very presence could mean the difference between victory and annihilation. The once peaceful colony world of New Eden lay in ruins, thousands of human bodies scattered across its ravaged landscape. The remaining colonists huddled in their final stronghold, their hope dwindling with each passing moment. Lieutenant Wright, a seasoned veteran of countless battles, understood that their only chance for survival rested on the success of his high-risk mission to destroy the Nasat command center. As Mark led his small team through the war-torn streets, the acrid smell of smoke and death filled their nostrils. They moved silently, their weapons at the ready, every shadow a potential threat. It was during this perilous advance that they encountered Uko, a young Nasat female who had been cast out by her own people for opposing the war. Uko's presence initially sparked distrust among the human soldiers. Her insectoid features and chitinous exoskeleton were a stark reminder of the enemy they'd been fighting. But as she revealed critical intelligence about Nasat weaknesses, Mark saw an opportunity to turn the tide of battle. He made the difficult decision to accept her help in exchange for protection, knowing full well that this choice could either save them all or lead them to their doom. As they infiltrated the Nasat base, Uko proved her worth beyond doubt. Her nimble appendages danced across alien control panels, disabling security systems with an ease that left the human soldiers in awe. Her tactical advice, born from an intimate knowledge of Nasat strategy, guided them through the labyrinthine structure undetected. The mission progressed with a tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. Each step brought them closer to their objective, but also increased the risk of discovery. When they finally reached the heart of the Nasat command center, chaos erupted. Alarms blared, and the air filled with the angry buzzing of Nasat warriors converging on their position. In the ensuing firefight, Mark's training took over. He moved with precision, his weapon an extension of his body as he cut down Nasat after Nasat. But in a moment of heroic sacrifice, he threw himself in front of Uko, shielding her from a barrage of enemy fire. Pain exploded across his body as multiple energy bolts found their mark. As Mark lay bleeding on the cold metal floor, the world around him faded in and out of focus. He was vaguely aware of Uko's frantic movements, her alien hands working to stem the flow of blood from his wounds. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was the successful detonation of their charges, bringing the Nasat command structure crashing down around them. When Mark awoke days later, he found himself hailed as a hero by the surviving colonists. The destruction of the Nasat command center had dealt a crippling blow to the invasion force, turning the tide of the battle for New Eden. But as he looked around the makeshift infirmary, he realized that Uko was nowhere to be seen. Pushing through his pain, Mark demanded answers. He learned that the colony's leadership was debating Uko's fate, torn between gratitude for her help and lingering suspicion of her species. Despite his weakened state, Mark knew he had to act. He had seen firsthand the courage and loyalty Uko possessed, and he wouldn't let fear and prejudice condemn her. As Mark struggled to his feet, determined to advocate for Uko's acceptance and protection, he understood that their unlikely alliance represented more than just the salvation of New Eden. It was a potential path forward for both species, a chance to bridge the gulf of mistrust and hatred that had led to this war. But he also knew that many would see it as a dangerous compromise, a betrayal of humanity's interests. With the eyes of both humans and Nasat across the galaxy now fixed on New Eden, Mark realized that the true battle was just beginning. The fight for understanding, for acceptance, for a future where humans and Nasat could coexist. This would be his most challenging mission yet. And as he thought of Uko, the brave young Nasat who had risked everything to save him and his people, he knew it was a fight worth having. Mark's eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the harsh light of the infirmary. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled his nostrils as he became aware of his surroundings. His body ached, a reminder of the wounds he'd sustained during the mission. As his vision cleared, he noticed a figure beside his bed. Uko, her insectoid features softened with concern. "You're awake," she chittered softly, her mandibles clicking gently. The doctors weren't sure when you'd come around. Mark attempted to sit up, wincing at the pain that shot through his torso. Uko's appendages gently pressed him back down. Easy, Lieutenant. You need rest. Over the next few days, Mark's recovery became the focal point of the colony's attention. Visitors streamed in and out of the infirmary, each eager to catch a glimpse of the hero who had turned the tide of battle. But it was Uko's constant presence that truly aided his healing. The colony leadership, still wary of the young Nasat female, had assigned her to assist in Mark's rehabilitation. Their reasoning was transparent. Keep her close to their war hero for better monitoring. But as Mark regained his strength, he found himself looking forward to Uko's visits more and more. During one of their daily sessions, as Uko helped Mark with his physical therapy exercises, the infirmary door slid open. A man in a crisp Earth Federation uniform strode in, his presence immediately commanding attention. "Lieutenant Wright," the man said, his voice clipped and official. "I'm Ambassador Chen from Earth. I've come to assess the situation here on New Eden." Mark straightened as best he could, ignoring the twinge of pain in his side. "Ambassador, it's an honor." Chen's eyes flickered to Uko, a flash of unease crossing his face before he schooled his features. "I see the reports of your unusual alliance were not exaggerated." The ambassador brought news from across human space, reports of escalating tensions and Nasat aggression on other colonies. As Chen spoke, Mark could see the wheels turning in the diplomat's mind, his gaze repeatedly returning to Uko with a mixture of skepticism and calculation. As Mark's recovery progressed, he found himself able to walk again, albeit with a slight limp. He used his newfound mobility to advocate for Uko's full integration into the colony. In a meeting with Governor Reyes and other colony officials, Mark stood tall despite the pain, his voice firm as he laid out his proposal. "Uko's knowledge of Nasat tactics and weaknesses is invaluable," he argued. "We have an opportunity here to develop new defensive technologies and strategies. We'd be fools not to take it." The room erupted into heated debate. Some officials nodded in agreement, while others vehemently opposed the idea. Ambassador Chen remained silent, his expression unreadable. In the end, it was Mark's status as a hero that tipped the scales. Governor Reyes, her face etched with lines of worry, gave a reluctant nod. "Very well, Lieutenant. We'll give your plan a chance." The colony's lead scientist, Dr. Eliza Foster, was assigned to work with Uko. Initially skeptical, Foster's attitude changed rapidly as she delved into the intricacies of Nasat biology and technology with Uko's guidance. Mark observed one of their sessions, watching in amazement as Uko's nimble appendages manipulated holographic displays, explaining the inner workings of Nasat energy weapons. Dr. Foster's eyes gleamed with excitement as she furiously took notes. Their collaboration bore fruit faster than anyone had anticipated. Within weeks, they had developed a prototype for a new type of energy shield capable of repelling Nasat weapons. The day of the first successful test, a palpable wave of hope swept through the colony. As word of New Eden's advancement spread, requests for aid and information poured in from other human colonies. Ambassador Chen, seeing an opportunity to turn the tide of the war, approached Mark with a proposal. "We need to share this knowledge with other threatened human worlds," Chen said, his earlier skepticism replaced by grudging respect. "I'm proposing a diplomatic mission. You and Uko would be at the forefront." Before Mark could respond, alarms blared throughout the colony. Security channels erupted with chatter about an attack in progress. Mark's combat instincts kicked in as he sprinted toward the source of the commotion, ignoring the protest of his healing wounds. He arrived at a scene of chaos. A group of armed men, their faces contorted with hate, were attempting to drag Uko away. At their head stood a tall, muscular man with a scarred face, Colonel Harker, a known human extremist. "Stop!" Mark shouted, charging into the fray. He engaged Harker's men in fierce hand-to-hand combat, his body moving on pure adrenaline and muscle memory. Fists flew, bones cracked, and bodies hit the floor as Mark fought to protect Uko. In the end, Mark stood victorious but battered, fresh blood seeping through his uniform where his wounds had reopened. Harker and his men lay subdued at his feet. Uko rushed to Mark's side, her alien features etched with concern. The attempted kidnapping sent shockwaves through the colony. Governor Reyes, realizing the situation could no longer be ignored, called for a public assembly to address the growing tensions. As the colonists gathered in the central plaza, Mark stood on the makeshift stage, his body screaming in pain but his willpower unshakable. He looked out at the sea of faces, some friendly, some hostile, most uncertain, and began to speak. His words flowed from his heart, painting a vision of a future where humans and Nasat could coexist in peace. He spoke of Uko's bravery, of the advancements they had made together, of the potential for understanding between their species. As Mark finished, a hush fell over the crowd. Then, to everyone's surprise, Uko stepped forward. Her voice, usually so alien to human ears, rang out clear and heartfelt as she shared her story of exile and her gratitude to the humans who had given her a chance. The assembly concluded with a narrow vote in favor of continuing cooperation with Uko and pursuing the diplomatic mission. As the crowd dispersed, Mark felt a mix of relief and apprehension. They had won this battle, but he knew the war for hearts and minds was a long way to go. In the days that followed, as preparations for the diplomatic mission began, Earth's military command sent a small fleet to New Eden. The increased military presence added a new layer of tension to the already complex situation. Through it all, Uko remained by Mark's side, helping him recover from his latest injuries. As they spent more time together, Mark found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't expected. Their growing closeness didn't go unnoticed, sparking rumors and concern among some colonists. One evening, as they watched the twin moons of New Eden rise from the observation deck, Uko turned to Mark, her compound eyes reflecting the starlight. "Why do you continue to fight for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark looked at her, seeing not an alien being, but a friend, a partner, perhaps something more. He opened his mouth to respond, the weight of their shared experiences and uncertain future hanging between them. Them. Mark took a deep breath, his eyes meeting Uko's alien gaze. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said softly, "and because A deafening explosion rocked the observation deck, cutting off Mark's words. Alarms blared as the lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. Mark's combat instincts kicked in immediately. "We're under attack," he said, grabbing Uko's appendage. "We need to move." They navigated the chaotic corridors, the emergency lights casting an eerie red glow. Colonists rushed past them, panic evident in their faces. Mark's comm unit crackled to life, Governor Reyes's voice tight with urgency. "Lieutenant Wright, we have a situation. Colonel Harker has escaped and his forces are attacking the main power grid. We're in complete blackout." Mark's expression resolute. "Understood, Governor. I'm on my way to—" "No," Reyes interrupted. "Your priority is Uko. We have intel suggesting this might be another attempt to capture her. Get to her quarters and secure her safety." Mark glanced at Uko, who nodded in understanding. They changed course, moving swiftly through the darkened hallways. As they approached Uko's quarters, the sound of struggle reached them. Mark pressed Uko against the wall, signaling for silence. Peering around the corner, he saw a group of armed men attempting to breach the security perimeter of Uko's living space. Mark recognized the tall, scarred figure leading them. Colonel Harker. "Stay here," Mark whispered to Uko. "I'll handle this." Before she could protest, Mark surged forward, catching the first attacker off guard with a swift punch to the solar plexus. The man crumpled, his weapon clattering to the floor. The narrow corridor erupted into a frenzy of fists and bodies. Mark moved with practiced efficiency, his recent injuries forgotten in the heat of combat. He ducked under a wild swing, using his opponent's momentum to throw him into another attacker. A flash of movement caught his eye. Uko had joined the fray. Her insectoid body moved with surprising grace in the darkness, her multiple limbs allowing her to grapple and subdue opponents with ease. "I told you to stay back," Mark grunted, dropping another assailant with a well-placed elbow strike. "And I chose not to listen," Uko replied, her mandibles clicking in what Mark had come to recognize as amusement. Together they fought their way through Harker's men, pushing them back from Uko's quarters. But as they reached a maintenance bay, Harker himself stepped into view, brandishing a stolen energy weapon. Enough, the colonel roared, his scarred face contorted with rage. Surrender the bug, right? Or I'll blow this whole colony's life support to hell. Mark froze, his mind racing. He locked eyes with Uko, a silent communication passing between them. With a barely perceptible nod, Mark raised his hands. All right, Harker, you win. Just don't do anything rash. As Mark took a step forward, ostensibly to hand over Uko, she sprang into action. Her appendages flew over a nearby control panel, inputting commands at a dizzying speed. Harker's eyes widened in realization, but it was too late. A high-pitched whine filled the air, followed by a pulse of energy that washed over them. The colonel's weapons sputtered and died, as did all the electronic devices in the vicinity. Mark didn't waste a second. He lunged at Harker, tackling him to the ground. A brief struggle ensued, but without his weapon, Harker was no match for Mark's combat training. In moments, the colonel lay unconscious and bound. Nice work, Mark said to Uko, breathing heavily. But we're not done yet. We need to get to the control center. They raced through the colony, the sounds of chaos slowly giving way to an eerie quiet as they approached the heart of the settlement. They burst into the control center to find Governor Reyes and Dr. Foster hunched over consoles, their faces illuminated by emergency lighting. Lieutenant Wright, Uko, Reyes acknowledged them without looking up. We're trying to restore power, but the damage is extensive. Uko moved to a nearby terminal, her appendages hovering over the controls. May I? Dr. Foster nodded, stepping aside. Uko's movements became a blur as she interfaced with the colony's systems, implementing a series of bypasses that Mark could barely follow. Slowly, systems began to come back online. As light and power returned to the colony, the full extent of Harker's plan became clear. Data streams revealed communications between the Colonel's group and a rogue faction within Earth's military, detailing plans to sabotage any peace efforts with the NASA. Ambassador Chen, who had been coordinating with Earth's Central Command, approached Mark with a grave expression. This changes everything, Lieutenant. We need to accelerate our diplomatic mission. But first, he glanced at Uko, we need to be certain of where loyalties lie. Mark bristled. If you're suggesting loyalty tests for Uko, I won't allow it. She's proven herself time and again. The argument that ensued was interrupted by an urgent communication from Earth. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a star map with a massive fleet of Nasat ships at the edge of human space. The room fell silent as the implication sank in. Finally, Governor Reyes spoke. We have no choice. The diplomatic mission must proceed immediately. Lieutenant Wright, you'll act as Uko's liaison and protector. Dr. Foster, adapt our new shield technology for larger-scale use. We need every advantage we can get. As the control center erupted into a flurry of activity, Mark pulled Uko aside. The weight of their new responsibilities hung heavy between them. Are you ready for this? He asked softly. Uko's compound eyes met his gaze, reflecting the purpose he felt. I am. But Mark, there's so much about my people you don't know. So much I need to tell you. Before Mark could respond, Captain Sarah Larson, the newly arrived diplomatic expert, approached them. Lieutenant Wright, Uko, we need to begin preparations immediately. We have a lot of work ahead of us. As they followed Larson, Mark couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The colony around them had transformed into a fortified stronghold, the once peaceful settlement now filled with defensive installations. And yet, as they prepared for a mission that could determine the fate of both their species, Mark found himself grappling with an unexpected conflict. He glanced at Uko, noting the grace of her movements, the intelligence shining in her alien eyes. Despite everything they'd been through, despite the growing closeness between them, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered doubts. Could he truly trust her? As they stepped into the diplomatic corps headquarters, Mark pushed the thought aside. They had a job to do, and the fate of two species hung in the balance. Balance. Mark pushed aside his lingering doubts and focused on the task at hand. As they entered the diplomatic corps headquarters, an urgent message from the colony's long-range sensor operators crackled through their comms. Governor Reyes's voice cut through the static, tight with tension. Lieutenant Wright, Captain Larson, report to the command center immediately. We have an incoming contact. Mark exchanged a quick glance with Uko before they rushed out, following Captain Larson through the winding corridors of the colony. The command center was a hive of activity when they arrived, screens flickering with data and personnel moving with impossibly strong panic. Governor Reyes stood at the central console, her face illuminated by the holographic display of New Eden's orbital space. A single red dot blinked ominously, approaching the planet at high speed. "NASAT scout ship," Reyes said without preamble. "ETA 12 minutes. I've ordered our defenses to high alert." Mark felt his muscles tense, combat instincts kicking in. "Rules of engagement, Governor?" "Defensive posture for now," Reyes replied, her eyes never leaving the display. "But be prepared for anything." Uko stepped forward, her compound eyes fixed on the incoming ship's trajectory. "Allow me to attempt communication," she said, her alien voice steady despite the circumstances. "I may be able to determine their intentions." Captain Larson nodded, gesturing to a nearby communication station. "Do it." Mark watched as Uko's appendages danced over the unfamiliar human controls, inputting a complex series of commands. The room fell silent, all eyes on the alien as she worked. Suddenly, a burst of static filled the air, followed by a series of clicks and chirps that Mark recognized as the NASAT language. Uko's antennae twitched as she listened intently, her mandibles working in what Mark had come to recognize as an expression of surprise. "It's a distress call," Uko said, her voice filled with disbelief. "They're requesting asylum." The command center erupted into a flurry of whispered conversations and hurried movements. Governor Reyes raised a hand, silencing the room. "Can we trust this?" she asked, looking between Uko and Captain Larson. Larson's brow furrowed. "It could be a trap, but we can't ignore a plea for asylum. We need to investigate." Mark stepped forward. "I'll lead a team to meet them. Uko, I want you with me. Captain Larson, if you're willing, your diplomatic expertise could be crucial." Reyes nodded her approval. "Proceed with caution, Lieutenant. The rest of the colony remains on high alert." As they made their way to the colony's main airlock, Mark's mind raced with possibilities. Who was on that ship? What could have driven them to seek asylum with humans? And most importantly, could they be trusted? The scout ship had landed just beyond the colony's perimeter, a sleek, chitinous construct that seemed more grown than built. Mark led his team across the rocky terrain of New Eden, each step measured and cautious. As they approached, the ship's entry portal dilated open with a soft hiss. Mark's hand instinctively went to his sidearm, but he forced himself to remain calm as a single figure emerged. The NASAT that stepped out was unmistakably female, her body more slender than Uko's, with iridescent patterns running along her exoskeleton. But it was Uko's reaction that truly caught Mark's attention. "Zira!" Uko's voice was barely above a whisper, filled with a mixture of shock and, was that joy? The newcomer's antennae twitched in recognition. "Sister," she replied, her own voice thick with emotion. Mark blinked in surprise, looking between the two NASAT. "Sister?" he asked, unable to keep the confusion from his voice. Uko nodded, her compound eyes never leaving Zira. "My clutch sister. But why are you here? How—" Zira cut her off with a series of rapid clicks and chirps. Uko's posture stiffened, her antenna going rigid. "What is it?" Mark asked, tension creeping back into his muscles. Uko turned to him, her alien features set in what he had come to recognize as unwavering commitment. "She says she's defected from the NASAT military. She brings vital intelligence about the incoming armada." Captain Larson stepped forward, her diplomatic training evident in her carefully neutral expression. "We should continue this conversation inside the colony. Our experts will want to debrief her immediately." As they made their way back to the airlock, Mark found himself hyper-aware of the two NASAT walking behind him. He trusted Uko, or at least he wanted to, but Zira's sudden appearance had thrown everything into question. The debriefing room was a stark utilitarian space, designed for security rather than comfort. Zira sat at the center of the room, surrounded by a mix of military personnel and scientific experts. Dr. Foster stood to one side, his eyes gleaming with impossibly strong curiosity. "Tell us everything," Governor Reyes said, her voice firm but not unkind. Zira's antennae twitched nervously, but her voice remained steady as she began to speak, Uko translating for the benefit of the humans in the room. "The Nasat High Command has developed a superweapon," Zira said, her words sending a ripple of tension through the room. "A device capable of destabilizing a planet's core. They plan to test it here, on New Eden." The room erupted into chaos. Mark felt his blood run cold as he processed the implications. A weapon that could destroy entire worlds. The devastation would be unimaginable. Dr. Foster was the first to recover, his scientific mind already racing with possibilities. "If we could adapt our new shield technology, perhaps we could counteract the effects of this superweapon." Governor Reyes nodded grimly. "Do it. Work with Uko and Zira. We need every advantage we can get." As the room buzzed with activity, Mark found himself watching Uko and Zira. The two Nasat stood close together, their antennae occasionally brushing in what seemed to be an intimate gesture. He felt an unexpected pang in his chest at the sight. Captain Larson appeared at his side, her voice low. "We'll need to implement strict security measures for both Nasat. This information changes everything." Mark nodded, pushing aside his personal feelings. "Agreed, I'll oversee it myself." As they left the debriefing room, the colony around them transformed. The once peaceful settlement became a fortress, defensive installations springing up overnight. The diplomatic mission was put on hold as everyone focused on the impending threat. In Dr. Foster's lab, Uko and Zira worked tirelessly alongside the human scientists, their alien biology allowing them to work for hours without rest. Mark found himself spending more and more time there, ostensibly to oversee security, but increasingly drawn to the elegant efficiency of Uko's movements. Days blurred together in a haze of preparations and tense strategy meetings. Then, just as they were beginning to make progress on adapting the shield technology, a new complication arose. The ECS Thunderchild arrived in orbit, a behemoth of human engineering that dwarfed the colony's modest defenses. Its commander, Admiral Jensen, brought with him orders that threatened to unravel everything they had worked for. "Evacuate?" Governor Reyes's voice was incredulous as she faced the Admiral across the command center's main display. "We can't abandon New Eden. It's not just about this colony, it's about every human world out there." Admiral Jensen's face was a mask of relentless drive. "The risk is too great. The Nasat fleet outnumbers us, and with this superweapon—" "All the more reason to stand our ground," Mark interjected, stepping forward. "Sir, with all due respect, if we run now, we're dooming not just New Eden, but every other colony in Nasat strike range." The argument raged on, voices rising and falling as each side presented their case. Captain Larson moved between the factions, her diplomatic skills tested to their limits as she sought a compromise. In the end, a decision was reached. The civilians would be evacuated, but a volunteer force would remain to defend the planet and buy time for other colonies to prepare. As the colonists began the somber process of abandoning their homes, Mark found himself standing with Uko, watching the first evacuation shuttles rise into the amber sky of New Eden. "I'm staying," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Uko's compound eyes turned to him, a complex emotion playing across her alien features. "As am I," she replied. "My sister and I, we cannot abandon your people now." Mark felt a surge of emotions at her words, gratitude, admiration, and something deeper that he wasn't quite ready to name. As they stood together, watching their world change around them, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The remaining defenders of New Eden worked with unyielding commitment, preparing for a battle that would determine the fate of not just their colony, but potentially the entire human race. As the Nasat Armada drew ever closer, Mark found himself leading a desperate plan, one that would push the limits of both human and Nasat technology. With Uko and Zira at his side, he prepared to face an enemy that outnumbered and outgunned them. But as he looked around at the determined faces of his fellow defenders, he felt a glimmer of hope. They had courage, ingenuity, and most importantly, they had each other. As the first signs of the Nasat fleet appeared in New Eden's skies, Mark took a deep breath, steadying himself for the fight to come. Whatever happened next, he he knew that the fate of two species hung in the balance. Balance. As the first signs of the Nasat fleet appeared in New Eden's skies, Mark took a deep breath, steadying himself for the fight to come. The command center erupted into a flurry of activity as sensors lit up with incoming contacts. "Initiating Operation Phantom," Mark called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Activate the decoy beacons." Technicians scrambled to comply, their fingers flying over consoles. Across the planet's surface, a network of sophisticated transmitters hummed to life, projecting false signals into space. On the main tactical display, dozens of illusory human ships blinked into existence, surrounding the colony in a protective cocoon of deception. Uko and Zira watched the scene unfold, their compound eyes reflecting the holographic imagery. "The Nasat fleet is dividing," Zira reported, her antenna twitching as she analyzed the incoming data. "They're taking the bait." Mark allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before turning to Dr. Foster. "How's our shield coming along, Doctor?" Foster's face was illuminated by the glow of her tablet. "We're at 92% capacity. It should be ready by the time they realize they've been duped." The room fell silent as the first salvo of Nasat weapons fire streaked across the sky, impacting the empty space where the decoys had been projected. Mark's eyes sharp as he watched the destructive power of their enemy, knowing how close they had come to being on the receiving end of that barrage. "Admiral Jensen, this is New Eden Control," Mark said into his comm unit. "The Nasat have committed to their initial assault. You're clear to engage." "Copy that, New Eden," Jensen's gruff voice crackled through the speakers. "Thunderchild and her battle group are moving into position now. Give them hell down there." As the hidden human fleet emerged from behind New Eden's moon, the tide of battle began to shift. The Nasat, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of enemy ships in their rear, scrambled to regroup. "They've realized it's a trap," Uko announced, her voice tight with tension. "Mark, they're redirecting their ground forces to the colony's main defensive perimeter." Mark nodded, his mind already racing through tactical scenarios. "I'm heading out there. Captain Larson, you have command of the center. Uko, Zira, I need you here coordinating our defense." As Mark donned his combat gear and joined his squad, the sounds of battle grew louder. The whine of Nasat dropships filled the air, punctuated by the staccato rhythm of human anti-aircraft fire. "Echo Squad, on me!" Mark shouted as he led his team through the colony's streets. They took up positions behind hastily erected barricades, pulse rifles at the ready. The first wave of Nasat ground troops hit like a tidal wave of chitinous armor and sharp limbs. Mark's squad opened fire, their weapons spitting superheated plasma at the advancing aliens. The air filled with the acrid smell of scorched exoskeletons and the high-pitched screech of wounded Nasat. "Control, this is Echo Lead," Mark called into his comm. "We're engaged with enemy forces on the western perimeter. Request fire support on these coordinates." Uko's voice came through, steady despite the chaos. "Copy, Echo Lead. Fire support inbound. Mark, be advised, we're detecting a concentration of Nasat heavy weapons to your north." As if on cue, a barrage of energy blasts slammed into the buildings around Mark's position. Concrete and glass rained down as his squad scrambled for cover. "We're pinned down!" Mark shouted, ducking as another volley of Nasat fire streaked overhead. "Can't advance, can't retreat." In the command center, Uko's antenna twitched with agitation as she watched Mark's life signs fluctuate on the tactical display. Without a word, she unholstered a sidearm and made for the door. "Uko, wait!" Zira called after her sister. "Where are you going?" "To help," Uko replied simply, her compound eyes glinting with unwavering commitment. On the battlefield, Mark's squad was running low on options and ammunition. The Nasat advance was relentless, their alien tactics keeping the human defenders off balance. Just as Mark was considering a desperate charge, a familiar voice cut through the din of combat. "Mark, 3rd floor, north-facing window. Their command unit is coordinating from there." He turned to see Uko sprinting towards him, her alien form moving with surprising grace under fire. Together, they coordinated a precision strike on the Nasat command post, Uko's intimate knowledge of her species' weak points proving invaluable. With the Nasat leadership disrupted, the human defenders seized the initiative. Mark and Uko fought side by side, their movements synchronized as if they'd trained together for years. Their teamwork inspired the other soldiers, who pushed forward with renewed vigor. In orbit, the space battle raged with equal intensity. Admiral Jensen's fleet had caught the Nasat rearguard off guard, but the aliens' superior numbers were starting to tell. The Thunderchild's hull rang with impacts as it traded fire with 3 Nasat cruisers. "Target their flagship," Jensen ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos on the bridge. "All batteries, concentrate fire on these coordinates." The human ships focused their attack, their weapons finding weak points in the Nasat vessel's defenses. Explosions blossomed along the alien flagship's hull, but it remained operational. Back on the surface, Dr. Foster's voice cut through the command channel. "The shield is online, but we're detecting a massive energy buildup from the Nasat fleet. They're preparing to fire their superweapon." Mark and Uko shared a look of understanding. This was the moment everything hinged on. As they prepared for the Nasat's final assault, a new alert blared through the command network. "Unknown contacts entering the system." Zira's voice was filled with surprise and hope. They're Nasat ships, but they're not responding to the enemy fleet's hails." A new voice, deep and resonant, broadcast on all frequencies. "This is Commander Kraz of the Nasat Liberation Front. We stand with humanity against the tyranny of our own government. Let us fight together for a future of peace between our peoples." The arrival of the Nasat rebels shifted the balance of power in space. Admiral Jensen, seizing the opportunity, coordinated a daring assault on the enemy flagship. Mark watched from the ground as streaks of weapons fire crisscrossed the sky, the fate of New Eden hanging in the balance. Suddenly, a blinding flash lit up the atmosphere. The Nasat superweapon had fired, its destructive energy racing towards the planet. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed all was lost. Then miraculously, the experimental shield flared to life, deflecting the massive blast. "Shield holding." Dr. Foster's voice was filled with equal parts relief and strain. "But we can't take another hit like that." As the Nasat prepared for a second attack, the Thunderchild made its move. A salvo of experimental EMP warheads streaked towards the enemy flagship, their detonation engulfing the massive ship in a web of crackling energy. "Direct hit!" Jensen's triumphant voice echoed through the comm channels. "Their superweapon is offline!" On the ground, the Nasat forces faltered as word of their flagship's defeat spread. Mark and Uko pressed their advantage, leading a charge that broke the back of the alien assault. As the last pockets of resistance were mopped up, Mark found himself standing in the colony's main plaza, surrounded by the aftermath of battle. His eyes searched the crowd until they found Uko. Without hesitation, he strode towards her, sweeping the alien into a tight embrace. Their public display of affection drew surprised looks from humans and Nasat alike, but in that moment neither Mark nor Uko cared. They had survived against impossible odds, and in doing so, perhaps opened the door to a new era of interspecies cooperation. As the adrenaline of battle faded, the reality of their situation began to sink in. Governor Reyes called for an emergency meeting, gathering the key figures of the defense along with Admiral Jensen and the newly arrived Commander Kraz. "We've won the battle," Reyes began, her voice grave despite their victory. "But the war is far from finished. We need to discuss our next steps carefully." Mark and Uko exchanged glances as they took their seats at the conference table. They had faced the crucible of combat together, but the challenges ahead, navigating the complex politics of human-Nasat relations, integrating the rebel faction, and building a lasting peace, would test them in ways they could scarcely imagine. As the meeting began, Mark felt Uko's alien hand slip into his under the table. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Together as one. The days following the battle were a whirlwind of activity. As the dust settled and the immediate threat subsided, the true scope of the work ahead became clear. New Eden had survived, but the colony bore deep scars from the Nasat assault. Mark found himself constantly on the move, overseeing damage assessments, coordinating repair efforts, and liaising between military and civilian leadership. It was during one such meeting that Governor Reyes pulled him aside. her expression a mix of willpower and calculation. "Mark, I need you and Uko to take on a special assignment," she said, her voice low. "Your relationship, it's become something of a symbol. We need to capitalize on that." He raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this was going. "Governor? I'm forming a joint human-NASAT task force to integrate their technology into our infrastructure and develop new defense systems. I want you two to lead it." Mark's mind raced with the implications. It was a crucial role, one that could shape the future of human-NASAT relations. But it also meant putting his relationship with Uko under intense scrutiny. "I understand the importance, Governor," he replied carefully. "But Uko and I, we're still figuring things out ourselves. To make us the face of interspecies cooperation—" Reyes held up a hand, cutting him off. "I know it's a lot to ask, but think about what you two represent, the possibility of true understanding between our peoples. We need that now more than ever." Before Mark could respond, alarms blared throughout the command center. They rushed to the main display, where a cluster of new contacts had appeared at the system's edge. "Another NASAT fleet?" Mark asked, tension coiling in his gut. The technician at the console shook her head. "Negative, sir. They're human signatures. It looks like it's a diplomatic envoy from Earth." Relief washed over the room, quickly followed by a new wave of anxiety. Earth's response to the battle would shape everything that came next. As the envoy's ships entered orbit, Mark sought out Uko. He found her in one of the makeshift field hospitals, her dexterous limbs assisting human medics as they tended to the wounded. "Uko?" he called softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, her compound eyes focusing on him with an intensity that still took his breath away. "Mark," she chittered, her antennae twitching in what he had come to recognize as a gesture of affection. "Is something wrong?" He shook his head, marveling at how quickly he'd learned to read her alien expressions. "Not wrong exactly, but things are about to get complicated. There's an envoy from Earth arriving, and Governor Reyes has a new assignment for us." As Mark explained the situation, he watched Uko's reactions carefully. Her exoskeleton shifted colors subtly, a sign of deep thought. "This task force," she said finally, "it could be a great opportunity to bridge the gap between our peoples. But it will not be easy. There are many on both sides who fear what we represent." Mark nodded, reaching out to take one of her hands in his. The gesture still felt new, exciting, and a little strange. "I know, but if anyone can make this work, it's us. We've already beaten impossible odds together." Their moment was interrupted by a commotion at the hospital entrance. A group of humans in crisp uniforms strode in, led by a distinguished-looking man with salt-and-pepper hair. "Dr. Marcus Chen," Mark murmured, recognizing the famous xenobiologist from news broadcast. "Looks like Earth isn't wasting any time." Dr. Chen's gaze swept the room, taking in the mix of human and NASAT patients with obvious fascination. When his eyes landed on Mark and Uko, still holding hands, a look of intense curiosity crossed his face. "Ah, you must be the heroes I've heard so much about," Chen said as he approached. "Mark, isn't it? And you must be Uko. I'm very much looking forward to speaking with you both." As they exchanged greetings, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were about to change dramatically once again. The arrival of Earth's delegation marked the beginning of a new phase, one where the personal and the political would become increasingly difficult to separate. Across the colony, similar scenes were playing out. Admiral Jensen oversaw the integration of New Eden's defenses with the newly arrived Earth forces, his gruff exterior hiding the strain of balancing military necessity with diplomatic sensitivity. Commander Kraz, leader of the NASAT rebels, found himself in the unfamiliar position of peacemaker. As some of his more hardline followers began to question their alliance with humans, Kraz worked tirelessly to maintain unity. In her lab, Dr. Foster pored over NASAT technical data, her mind alight with the possibilities of integrating their biotechnology with human systems. The potential breakthroughs were tantalizing, but she couldn't shake a nagging sense of ethical unease. As night fell on New Eden, the colony hummed with activity. The battle was over, but a new struggle was just beginning, one that would test the limits of understanding between two very different species. Mark stood at the window of his quarters, looking out over the bustling colony. Uko moved to stand beside him, her alien form a stark contrast to the human-designed room. "What are you thinking?" she asked, her translator rendering her clicks and chirps into smoothly accented English. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm thinking that leading this task force is going to be the biggest challenge of our lives. We'll be under constant scrutiny, every decision picked apart by both sides." Uko's antenna brushed against his arm, a gesture he had come to find oddly comforting. "True, but we will face it together, as we have everything else." As they stood there, silhouetted against the star-filled sky, neither could have predicted the trials that lay ahead. The arrival of Earth's diplomats, the simmering tensions among the Nasat rebels, the technological breakthroughs on the horizon. All of it would push their relationship to its limits. But for now, in this quiet moment, they simply took comfort in each other's presence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conflicts to navigate. Tonight, they allowed themselves to simply be Mark and Uko, two beings from different worlds who had found something extraordinary in each other. Outside, New Eden continued its transformation. Construction crews worked through the night, repairing battle damage and adapting Nasat technology to human needs. In orbit, Earth ships maintained a watchful presence alongside their Nasat rebel allies. The colony stood at a crossroads, poised between conflict and cooperation. And at the heart of it all, a human and a Nasat prepared to show both their peoples that understanding was possible, that love could bridge the gap between the stars. The dawn of New Eden's diplomatic summit brought with it a palpable tension that seemed to permeate every corner of the colony. Mark stood at the command center's main viewport, his eyes scanning the bustling activity below as final preparations were made for the high-stakes event. "Another accident reported at the conference hall, sir," a young lieutenant reported, her voice tight with concern. "That's the third one this week." Mark's eyebrows furrowed. These accidents were becoming far too frequent to be coincidence. "Show me the details," he ordered, turning to the holographic display. As he reviewed the incident reports, Uko entered the room, her exoskeleton a muted shade of green that Mark had come to associate with worry. "The Earth delegation is requesting additional security measures," she chittered softly. "They're growing increasingly uneasy." Before Mark could respond, Governor Reyes strode in, her face a mask of persistence. "We need to talk," she said, gesturing for them to follow her into a private conference room. Once the door sealed behind them, Reyes spoke without preamble. "Earth Central Command is breathing down my neck. They're demanding we implement stricter segregation policies between humans and Nasat within the colony." Mark felt his stomach drop. "Governor, you can't be serious. That would undo everything we've been working towards." Reyes's eyes flickered to where Mark and Uko stood close together. "I don't like it any more than you do, but my hands are tied. We need Earth's support, especially now. I'm sorry, but effective immediately, you two will need to limit your interactions in public and professional settings." The words hit Mark like a physical blow. He glanced at Uko, seeing his own shock and dismay reflected in the subtle shifts of her compound eyes. As they left the conference room, the colony's alert system blared to life. "Security breach in Lab Complex B," an automated voice announced. "All personnel report to designated safe zones." Mark and Uko exchanged a quick look before springing into action. They raced through the corridors, the sound of their footsteps drowned out by the wailing alarms. They arrived at the lab complex to find Dr. Foster and her team securing sensitive equipment. "Someone tried to access our research on the neural interface technology," Foster explained, her normally calm demeanor shaken. They knew exactly what they were looking for. As Mark began coordinating a sweep of the facility, Dr. Marcus Chen burst into the room, his face flushed with excitement and concern. "I need to speak with you both," he said, gesturing to Mark and Uko. "Privately. It's urgent." In a sealed, clean room, Chen shared his findings. "I've discovered something remarkable about Nasat biology," he began, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Prolonged exposure to human pheromones can trigger a powerful biochemical reaction in Nasat physiology. It has the potential to alter their behavior and decision-making processes." Uko's antennae twitched rapidly, a sign of intense concentration. "What are you saying, Doctor?" Chen's eyes darted between them. I'm saying that your relationship, and others like it, could have far-reaching consequences we've barely begun to understand. The ethical implications alone are staggering. Before they could fully process this revelation, Mark's communicator chirped. Sir, Commander Kraz is requesting an immediate meeting. He says it's a matter of colony security. The next hour was a whirlwind of activity. Kraz, his exoskeleton a deep, troubled blue, shared intelligence about a planned attack on the summit by Nasat military hardliners. They intend to make it appear as if human extremists are responsible, he explained gravely. It would shatter any hope of peace between our peoples. As Mark absorbed this information, his mind raced through potential countermeasures. A risky plan began to form, one that hinged on Dr. Foster's experimental neural interface technology. We could use it to infiltrate their communications network, Mark proposed, turning to Uko. But it would require you to undergo a procedure that could permanently alter your brain chemistry. Uko's compound eyes met his gaze steadily. If it means preventing this attack and saving lives, I'll do it. Their planning session was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Sarah Larson, the experienced diplomat who had arrived with the Earth envoy. Her expression was grim as she pulled Mark aside. I need to tell you something, she said in a low voice. I'm not just a diplomat. I'm a deep-cover agent for Earth's intelligence service. I have orders to extract Dr. Chen and his research findings. They're deemed too valuable to risk in New Eden's current climate. Mark felt the weight of each new revelation pressing down on him. The summit, meant to be a step towards peace, was becoming a nexus of conflicting agendas and hidden dangers. As night fell on New Eden, a new crisis emerged. Alarms blared as shuttles carrying human refugees from nearby settlements began to dock. They're fleeing renewed Nasat attacks, Zira reported, her voice tense. Our resources are already strained to the breaking point. Mark watched as security personnel were diverted to manage the influx, knowing it left the summit more vulnerable. He turned to address his team when Zira's voice cut through the chaos once more. Mark, I've uncovered something critical, she said, her eyes wide with urgency. The Nasat superweapon we thought was destroyed. Components were salvaged. They're rebuilding it in secret, and intelligence suggests it could be operational in time for the summit. The command center fell silent as the implications sank in. Mark looked around at the faces of his team, human and Nasat alike, each wearing expressions of perseverance tinged with fear. All right, Mark said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his mind. We have multiple threats to neutralize and not much time. Let's break this down and formulate a plan. As they gathered around the holographic display, Mark felt Uko's presence at his side. Despite the new restrictions, despite the uncertainty Chen's research had introduced, he drew strength from her nearness. The summit's opening day loomed before them, a crucible that would test not only their skills and persistence, but the very possibility of human-Nasat coexistence. As Mark began outlining their strategy, he knew that the decisions made in the coming hours would shape the future of both their peoples for generations to come. The command center erupted into action as the summit's opening ceremonies began. Mark's eyes darted between multiple holographic displays, each showing a different aspect of the unfolding crisis. He took a deep breath, centering himself before addressing his team. Zira, coordinate with the refugee management teams. We need to prevent that riot from spreading. He turned to Uko, their eyes meeting briefly. It's time. Are you ready? Uko's exoskeleton shifted to a steely gray. I am. They made their way to Dr. Foster's lab, where the neural interface equipment hummed with potential. Foster's face was etched with concern as she explained the procedure one final time. Remember, Uko, at the first sign of severe discomfort, we pull you out, Foster said, attaching electrodes to Uko's head. As the interface activated, Uko's body went rigid. Her compound eyes flickered rapidly, processing the influx of data from the Nasat military network. Mark watched, his hand hovering near the emergency shutdown switch. I see it, Uko chittered, her voice strained. The attack plan. They're moving into position now. Mark relayed the intelligence to his security teams, his mind racing to formulate a defense strategy. As he coordinated the response, A young lieutenant burst into the lab. "Sir, Captain Larson is attempting to remove Dr. Chen and his research from the colony." Mark's eyebrows furrowed. He glanced at Uko, torn between his duty to protect her and the need to secure Chen's vital data. "Stay with her," he ordered Foster, before sprinting toward Chen's lab. He arrived to find Larson attempting to escort Chen out, a data drive clutched in her hand. Mark positioned himself between them and the exit. "Stand down, Captain," he ordered, his voice low and dangerous. Larson's eyes narrowed. "You don't understand what's at stake here, Major. I have my orders." "And I have mine. That research stays on New Eden." The standoff lasted only seconds before Mark lunged, grappling with Larson. They struggled, Mark using his larger frame to pin her against a wall. The data drive clattered to the floor. "This is treason," Larson hissed as Mark secured her hands behind her back. "No," Mark replied, breathing heavily. "This is protecting the future of two species." As he handed Larson over to security, the lights flickered and died. Emergency backups kicked in, bathing the corridor in an eerie red glow. Mark's comm unit crackled to life. "Sir, we've lost power to half the colony," Zero reported. "The saboteurs hit our main grid." Mark cursed under his breath. "Lock down all critical systems. I'm on my way to the command center." He arrived to find chaos. Reports flooded in of Nasat ships breaching the atmosphere, ground forces converging on the summit location. Mark grabbed a tactical headset, linking directly to his defense teams. "All units, this is Major Hawkins. We have incoming hostiles. Protect the delegates at all costs." He led a mixed squad of humans and Nasat rebels toward the front lines, the sound of weapons fire growing louder with each step. As they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a group of Nasat extremists. The firefight was intense in close quarters. Mark's team used their knowledge of the colony's layout to outmaneuver the attackers, driving them back with precision fire and coordinated movements. In the midst of the battle, Mark's comm unit chirped urgently. It was Foster, her voice tight with worry. "Major, Uko's neural patterns are becoming erratic. The interface is causing significant strain." Mark's heart raced. "Pull her out now!" "She's refusing," Foster replied. "Says the tactical data is too important." Mark swore, ducking behind cover as energy bolts sizzled past. "Put her on!" Uko's voice came through, weak and pained. "Mark, I can do this. We need the intel." "Not at the cost of your mind," Mark argued, firing off a burst from his weapon. "That's an order, Uko. Disconnect." There was a pause, filled only by the sounds of battle. Then softly, "Understood." As Mark redirected his focus to the fight, another message came through. This time, it was Zira. "Sir, Commander Kraz and his team have secured the superweapon components, but Kraz is down, badly injured." Mark felt a surge of admiration for the Nasat commander's bravery. "Get a medical team to him immediately," he ordered. The tide of the battle began to turn. Using the intelligence Uko had gathered, Mark's forces systematically dismantled the Nasat attack. They pushed the extremists back, away from the summit location, and towards the colony's outskirts. As the fighting intensified, Mark found himself face-to-face with the Nasat attack leader. The alien's exoskeleton was a deep, angry red as it charged at Mark with razor-sharp appendages extended. Mark dodged the initial assault, years of combat training kicking in. He feinted left, then struck with a powerful right hook that sent the Nasat reeling. The two circled each other, looking for an opening. "Your kind doesn't belong here," the Nasat leader clicked, its mandibles twitching with fury. "We're not leaving," Mark replied, his voice steady. "This is our home now, too." They clashed again, a furious exchange of blows. Mark's human agility gave him an edge, allowing him to slip past the Nasat's defenses. With a final, decisive strike, he brought the alien down. As the last pockets of resistance were neutralized, Mark received word that the summit delegates were calling for an immediate ceasefire. The cooperative defense of New Eden had made a powerful impression. But Mark had no time to celebrate. His thoughts were consumed by Uko's condition. He raced through the corridors, heading for the medical facility. He burst into the treatment room, his eyes immediately finding Uko's still form on a biobed. Dr. Foster looked up from her scans, her expression grave. "The neural trauma is severe," she said quietly. "We're doing everything we can, but—" Mark moved to Uko's side, taking one of her appendages in his hand. Her exoskeleton was a pale, sickly yellow. He leaned close, his voice barely a whisper. "Stay with me, Uko. We've come too far to lose each other now." As medical staff worked frantically around them, Mark remained by Uko's side, his mind racing with the implications of the day's events. The future of New Eden, of human-Nasat relations, and of his own heart hung in the balance, waiting for Uko to open her eyes. Hours passed as Mark maintained his vigil by Uko's bedside. The medical facility bustled with activity, a mix of human and Nasat medical personnel working in tandem to stabilize her condition. Dr. Foster's face was etched with concentration as she pored over neural scans, conferring in hushed tones with her Nasat counterparts. "We're seeing some improvement," Foster said, her voice tinged with cautious optimism. "But the neural trauma is unlike anything we've encountered before. We're in uncharted territory here." Mark nodded, his grip on Uko's appendage tightening slightly. "She's strong. She'll pull through." As he sat there, the weight of recent events pressed down on him. The failed Nasat attack, the successful defense of the summit, and now this. Each crisis seemed to bleed into the next without respite. His comm unit chirped insistently, a constant reminder of his duties beyond this room. "Major Hawkins, your presence is requested in the command center." Zira's voice came through, sounding strained. "Governor Reyes is pushing for immediate implementation of new integration policies. It's causing tension." Mark sighed, casting a final glance at Uko's still form before reluctantly standing. "I'm on my way." The corridors of New Eden were a hive of activity. Humans and Nasat moved with purpose, their paths intertwining more closely than ever before. Mark could feel the change in the air, a mixture of hope and apprehension that seemed to cling to every surface. He entered the command center to find it in a state of controlled chaos. Governor Reyes stood at the center, gesticulating emphatically as she addressed a mixed group of human and Nasat officials. "We must strike while the iron is hot," Reyes insisted, her eyes blazing with conviction. "The successful defense of the summit has created a unique opportunity for lasting peace. We cannot squander it with hesitation." Commander Kraz, his exoskeleton still bearing the marks of recent battle, clicked in agreement. "The governor is right. Our peoples fought side by side. We must build on that foundation." Mark stepped forward, drawing the attention of the room. "What exactly are we proposing?" Reyes turned to him, her expression softening slightly. "Major Hawkins, good. We're implementing a series of integration policies effective immediately. Joint human-Nasat patrols, shared living quarters, collaborative research projects, a complete overhaul of our previous segregation." Mark's brow furrowed as he processed the implications. "That's a lot of change very quickly, Governor. Are we sure the colony is ready for this?" A human official, his face creased with worry, spoke up. "It's too much, too fast. There are concerns about preserving our cultural identity." His Nasat counterpart chittered in agreement, her exoskeleton shifting to a troubled blue. "Many of my people feel the same. We support peace, but not at the cost of who we are." The room erupted into heated debate, voices rising as arguments flew back and forth. Mark raised his hands, calling for quiet. "I understand the urgency," he said, his voice carrying authority, "but we need to proceed carefully. Forced integration could backfire, creating more resentment than unity." Reyes opened her mouth to argue, but Mark continued. "Let's start with voluntary programs. We can incentivize participation without making it mandatory. That way, we build trust organically." The tension in the room eased slightly as heads nodded in cautious agreement. Kraz clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "A measured approach has merit. We could begin with joint training exercises for our defense forces." As the group began to hash out the details of this compromise, Mark's comm unit buzzed again. It was Dr. Foster. "Major, you need to come to the lab immediately. It's about Dr. Chen's research." Mark excused himself, his mind racing as he made his way to Chen's laboratory. He found Foster and Chen huddled over a holographic display, their faces grave. "What's going on?" Mark asked, a sense of unease growing in his gut. Chen looked up, his eyes wide behind his glasses. "My findings about human pheromones and their effect on nasat physiology, they've gone public. Someone leaked the data." Mark felt the blood drain from his face. "How bad is it?" Foster's expression was grim. "Bad. The colony's buzzing with speculation. Some see it as a breakthrough in interspecies understanding. Others are calling it a bioweapon," Chen finished, his voice barely above a whisper. Mark closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. "And my relationship with Uko?" "It's become Exhibit A in the debate," Foster said softly. "Your interactions are being scrutinized, analyzed for any sign of undue influence." The implications hit Mark like a physical blow. His private life, his feelings for Uko, all of it was now thrust into the public eye, dissected and judged by those who couldn't possibly understand. Before he could fully process this new crisis, alarms blared throughout the colony. Zira's voice came over the comm system, tense and urgent. "All security personnel to your stations. We have reports of violence breaking out in multiple sectors. Protests against the new integration policies have turned ugly." Mark's training kicked in, pushing his personal concerns aside. "I'm on my way to the security center. Foster, Chen, lock down this lab. No one in or out without my direct authorization." As he sprinted through the corridors, Mark could hear the sounds of conflict echoing through the colony. The promise of peace that had seemed so close was now threatening to slip away, consumed by fear and mistrust. He reached the security center, immediately taking charge of the situation. "Status report," he barked, scanning the multiple displays showing chaos erupting across New Eden. "It's a powder keg, sir," a young lieutenant reported. "Conservative factions from both species are clashing with integration supporters. We've got fires breaking out in the residential sectors and reports of looting in the commercial district." Mark's mind raced, formulating a response. "Deploy mixed human NASAT security teams. Use non-lethal measures only. Our priority is de-escalation." As he coordinated the response, Mark couldn't help but think of Uko, still lying unconscious in the medical bay. He silently vowed to bring the situation under control, to create a new Eden where their relationship could flourish without fear or judgment. The next hours were a blur of activity as Mark worked tirelessly to restore order to the colony. Gradually, the violence began to subside, replaced by an uneasy calm. But Mark knew this was just the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead, bridging the divide between those who embraced change and those who feared it. As dawn broke over New Eden, casting the colony in a soft pink light, Mark stood at the window of the command center. The events of the past day had shaken the foundation of everything they had built here. But as he watched humans and NASAT working side by side to clear debris and tend to the injured, he felt a glimmer of hope. His comm unit chirped, and he answered it with a weary, "Hawkins here." "Sir," Zira's voice came through, sounding oddly hesitant. "There's something you need to see. It's about Uko." Mark's heart raced as he rushed back to the medical bay, unsure of what he would find. As he approached Uko's room, he steeled himself for whatever lay ahead, knowing that the future of New Eden and his own future hung in the balance. Balance. His heart pounded as he entered the medical bay, eyes scanning for any sign of change. Dr. Foster met him at the door, her expression a mixture of excitement and bewilderment. "Major, you need to see this," she said, ushering him to Uko's bedside. Mark's breath caught in his throat as he saw Uko sitting up, her exoskeleton shimmering with a vibrant, healthy blue. Her compound eyes fixed on him, filled with an intensity he'd never seen before. "Mark," Uko said, her voice steady and clear. "I can see it all now." He approached cautiously, taking her appendage in his hand. "What do you mean? How are you feeling?" "The neural trauma," Dr. Foster interjected. "It's done something unprecedented. Uko's cognitive functions have not only stabilized but enhanced. Her brainwave patterns are off the charts." Uko nodded, her antennae twitching with excitement. It's like a fog has lifted. I can perceive things in ways I never could before. Human emotions, NASAT instincts, they're all so clear to me now. Mark's comm unit buzzed insistently, interrupting the moment. He answered to find Zira's voice, tense and urgent. Major, we have a situation. Admiral Hernandez is making a move on the colony's military assets. He's gathered a group of loyalists and is headed for the main command center. Mark's teeth gritted. He'd suspected Hernandez might try something like this, but not so soon. I'm on my way, he said, then turned to Uko. I have to go. Will you be... Uko's appendage tightened around his hand. I'm coming with you, she said, her tone brooking no argument. You'll need my help. Dr. Foster started to protest, but Uko was already sliding off the bed, her movements fluid and precise. Mark nodded, recognizing the commitment in her eyes. Let's go. They moved swiftly through the colony's corridors, the air thick with tension. As they approached the command center, they could hear raised voices and the distinct sound of weapons being readied. Mark held up a hand, signaling Uko to wait as he assessed the situation. Through the doorway, he could see Hernandez, flanked by a group of armed officers. The Admiral's face was flushed with anger as he shouted orders. This ends now, Hernandez bellowed. We've coddled these aliens for too long. It's time to show them who's really in charge here. Mark felt a surge of anger, but Uko's touch on his arm steadied him. She leaned in close, her voice low. I can sense his fear, Mark. It's driving his actions. He's not thinking clearly. Taking a deep breath, Mark stepped into view, his hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. Admiral Hernandez, he called out, his voice calm but authoritative. Stand down. This isn't the way. Hernandez whirled to face him, his expression a mixture of surprise and fury. Hawkins, should have known you'd show up to defend your alien friends. You're a disgrace to the uniform. Mark took a step forward, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. Think about what you're doing, Admiral. This won't just undo the progress we've made here. It'll spark a war that'll spread across the galaxy. Uko moved to Mark's side, her presence drawing murmurs from both Hernandez's group and the loyal officers who had been trying to hold them back. Her exoskeleton shifted to a calming green as she spoke. Your fear is understandable, Admiral. Change is always frightening. But what you're feeling, it's not so different from what many NASAT felt when humans first arrived. Hernandez's grip on his weapon tightened, but Mark could see uncertainty creeping into his eyes. Uko continued, her voice gentle but firm. We have a chance here to build something truly remarkable. A future where our strengths complement each other, where we're stronger together than we ever could be apart. Mark nodded, building on Uko's words. Look around you, Admiral. The officers with you. They're good people who believe they're doing the right thing. But deep down, they know this isn't the answer. We've all seen what happens when fear and mistrust are allowed to rule. He could see the commitment wavering in the faces of Hernandez's supporters. Some lowered their weapons, looking to the Admiral for guidance. Hernandez's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him. I don't know if I can trust them, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mark stepped forward, slowly reaching out to take the Admiral's weapon. Trust is earned, on both sides. We've made mistakes, all of us, but we've also shown what we can accomplish when we work together. Give us a chance to prove it to you. For a tense moment, Hernandez stood frozen. Then, with a heavy sigh, he released his grip on the weapon. I hope you know what you're doing, Hawkins, he said wearily. As Mark secured the weapon, Uko moved among the gathered officers, her presence and words soothing the tension in the room. Within minutes, the situation had been defused without a single shot fired. News of the thwarted coup attempt spread quickly through the colony. Rather than deepening the divide, it seemed to galvanize support for the integration movement. In the days that followed, Mark found himself in endless meetings with Governor Reyes and representatives from both Earth and the NASAT homeworld. We need to strike while the iron is hot, Reyes insisted during one such meeting. The joint governance structures we've been discussing, we need to implement them now. Mark nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. I agree, but we need to ensure everyone feels represented. This has to be a true partnership. As the discussions continued, a plan began to take shape. New Eden would become a model for human-Nasat cooperation, with integrated leadership at every level, and at the center of it all, a symbol of the trust between the two species. Mark himself, appointed as the head of New Eden's combined security forces. The ceremony to formalize his new role was held in the colony's central plaza. As Mark stood before the assembled crowd, humans and Nasat standing side by side, he felt a surge of hope for the future. His eyes found Uko in the front row, her exoskeleton shimmering with pride. "Today marks a new chapter in the history of New Eden," Mark began, his voice carrying across the plaza. "We've faced challenges that seemed insurmountable, but we've overcome them together. Human and Nasat, working as one." As he continued his speech, outlining his vision for a truly integrated colony, Mark could feel the energy in the crowd building. There was still work to be done, hurdles to overcome. But for the first time since he'd arrived on New Eden, he felt certain they were on the right path. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Mark threw himself into his new role, working tirelessly to implement the new governance structures. Uko was by his side every step of the way, her enhanced cognitive abilities proving invaluable as they navigated the complexities of merging two very different cultures. One evening, as they stood on the balcony of their shared quarters, looking out over the bustling colony, Uko turned to Mark. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you," she said, a hint of nervousness in her voice. Mark looked at her curiously. "What is it?" Uko's exoskeleton shifted through a range of colors before settling on a deep, warm purple. "In my research into human customs, I came across the concept of marriage, a formal union between partners. I was wondering if that might be something you'd consider, with me." Mark's heart swelled with emotion. He took Uko's appendages in his hands, his voice thick with feeling. "Uko, nothing would make me happier. Yes, 1,000 times. Yes." Their union ceremony became a colony-wide celebration, a joyous blending of human and Nasat traditions. As they exchanged vows, Mark, in his dress uniform, and Uko adorned with intricate bioluminescent patterns, the gathered crowd erupted in cheers. Governor Reyes, officiating the ceremony, beamed at the couple. "By the power vested in me by the people of New Eden, I now pronounce you united in marriage. May your bond be a shining example of what we can achieve together." As Mark and Uko sealed their union with a tender embrace, a new chapter in New Eden's history began. Their love, once seen as impossible, now stood as a beacon of hope for the future. A future where the stars themselves were no longer a barrier between hearts.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.